Ella had always enjoyed the quiet rhythm of her life in Willow Creek, a town where the streets were lined with small trees and the morning smelled of fresh dew and baked bread, a place where everyone knew each other but no one intruded. And she had grown used to the gentle solitude, tending her tiny garden, sipping her morning coffee by the window, and losing herself in books that transported her to worlds she sometimes wished were real. Yet even in the peaceful routine, she often felt a quiet ache, a subtle loneliness that she could not quite shake, a longing for connection that her work-from-home schedule and the scattered locations of her friends never fully satisfied, leaving her with evenings that were too long and nights where silence spoke louder than she wanted to hear. She had adapted, she told herself, and yet the small part of her heart that still hoped for something more kept flickering, like a candle struggling against the wind. And on one seemingly ordinary morning, when the sun cast its soft golden light across the kitchen counter, she noticed a moving van pulling up next door, large boxes stacked like miniature towers, and a couple of figures unloading furniture with precise care, which immediately drew her attention, curiosity pulling her out of her usual morning haze, and she wiped her hands on her apron and walked over, offering a shy greeting. And that was when she first met Liam, the man who would unknowingly stir feelings she had kept buried for years, who smiled with a warmth that seemed to embrace the cool autumn air, whose eyes had a kindness that made her feel seen in a way strangers rarely did, and his sister, Grace, equally kind but carrying a quiet strength that balanced Liam's gentle demeanor. And though Ella had only known them for minutes, she found herself wishing she could linger, asking herself why the universe had chosen this day, this moment, to interrupt her routine so completely. In the following days, she found Liam and Grace to be unexpectedly friendly, bringing over small gifts like bread still warm from the oven or jars of jam, little gestures that felt deeply personal, gestures that made her heart flutter despite her careful attempts to remain composed. And she began to notice that she looked forward to their greetings, that her day seemed brighter when they stopped by, and though she could not pinpoint exactly why, there was a pull she felt in her chest, a curiosity, a spark, that she had not felt in years, something that whispered that life was about to shift. And then, one afternoon, when the sun dipped lower, painting the neighborhood in soft amber hues, Liam approached her with a question that would tilt the world she had carefully built. Would she watch over their house for a few days while they dealt with some matters out of town? Her first instinct was to hesitate. She was a private person, cautious about letting strangers, or even new neighbors, into her life in such a significant way, but there was something in Liam's eyes, a mixture of trust and hope, that made her hesitate to refuse, and so she found herself agreeing, not fully understanding why, only feeling that quiet, persistent pull she had ignored for so long, a feeling that told her this was more than a favor, that this moment was the first step into a story she had never imagined for herself. As she stepped across the threshold of Liam's home for the first time, the air inside smelled faintly of fresh paint and faint pine, a welcoming scent that felt comforting and yet charged with anticipation, and her eyes fell on a small note left on the kitchen counter, a piece of paper with handwriting that was both careful and slightly rushed, and in simple words it read, "This will change everything." And Ella held the note, feeling a strange flutter in her chest, part fear, part excitement, wondering what exactly could change, and she moved through the house with a mix of awe and trepidation, noting the way sunlight streamed through the windows, the little details of the furniture, the warmth of the living room that seemed almost to hum with life. And she imagined the coming days, imagining herself alone in the space, imagining the quiet moments, and for the first time in a long time, she felt her heart quicken with anticipation, a feeling that told her that life was about to offer her something she had long been missing, something beyond the comfort of solitude. And that evening, as she prepared dinner in the unfamiliar kitchen, she felt the lingering presence of Liam and Grace, their laughter and voices echoing softly in her mind, and she realized that their brief gestures of kindness had already begun to leave a mark on her, an impression that went beyond neighborly friendliness, that touched a part of her she had thought dormant, a longing for connection and perhaps even something deeper. And as she sipped her tea, the wind brushing gently against the windows, she reflected on how unexpected life could be, how a simple encounter, a new neighbor, a small favor, could begin to open doors to emotions she had almost forgotten existed. And she could not help but wonder what awaited her in the coming days, whether the trust Liam and Grace had placed in her would lead to discoveries about herself, about life, about love and friendship. And in that quiet moment, she realized she was already changing, subtly, invisibly, and the note on the counter seemed to pulse in her mind. This will change everything, and she smiled softly, her heart light yet anxious, sensing the unknown that lay ahead, feeling the delicate tension between fear and hope, and she understood that sometimes, the most profound shifts begin with the smallest steps, with a simple act of kindness, with a willingness to open one's heart. And as the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky, she felt a quiet thrill, a sense that her ordinary life was poised on the edge of something extraordinary, something that would awaken her heart and perhaps lead her to moments she had only dared to dream about in her quietest thoughts. And in that anticipation, that soft ache of curiosity and longing, Ella stood in the middle of the living room, taking in the warmth of the space, the echo of voices that were not hers, the promise of the days to come, and she understood that her life, as she had known it, was no longer the same, that she was standing at the threshold of change, and that every choice she would make in the next few days, every interaction with Liam and Grace, every quiet moment in that house, could alter the path she had walked for so long, could awaken feelings she had kept locked away, and in that single, unassuming moment, as the light faded and the house grew quiet, Ella felt her pulse quicken, the thrill of possibility mingling with a nervous uncertainty, the promise of connection, the hint of adventure, and the unmistakable stirring of something that felt dangerously close to hope, to longing, to the beginnings of a story she could never have imagined, and she realized, with a soft exhale, that the ordinary life she had cherished had quietly shifted into something new, something unpredictable, something that whispered of heartbeats in quiet hallways, laughter yet to be shared, and the subtle, irresistible pull of an unexpected journey that was about to begin. The days following Ella's first steps into Liam and Grace's home were filled with a strange mix of excitement and nervousness, a constant flutter in her chest that she couldn't quite explain. As she found herself settling into the rhythm of caring for their house, watering plants, tidying rooms, and organizing small details with meticulous care, all while the echo of their presence lingered in every corner, reminding her of their trust, of the warmth of their laughter, and the subtle way Liam's smile seemed to haunt her thoughts, staying in her mind long after he had left for errands. And it was during one particularly rainy afternoon, when the patter of water against the windows created a gentle, almost hypnotic rhythm, that Grace invited Ella to sit with them in the living room. A quiet space warmed by a soft fire and the faint scent of cinnamon from candles burning on the mantel, and there was a tension in the air, an unspoken anticipation, that made Ella's pulse quicken, as Liam fidgeted slightly, holding a small envelope in his hands with fingers that betrayed his nerves, and Ella, curious yet cautious, watched him, trying to read the emotions flickering across his face, sensing that this moment would change everything, though she could not yet imagine how profoundly. And then, in a voice that was calm yet trembling with an undercurrent of emotion, Liam began to speak, telling her that they had a proposition, something unexpected, something that could alter the path of her life in ways she had never considered. And Ella felt her heart skip, a mixture of excitement and fear coiling in her stomach, as she leaned forward, asking the inevitable question, what kind of offer, and why her, of all people? And Liam, swallowing hard, explained that they were preparing to leave the country for a year, dealing with matters that required their full attention, and during that time, they wanted Ella to manage their property, to take care of their home, their belongings, and even aspects of their business. Responsibilities that were significant and meaningful, more than just a favor, but an opportunity to be trusted with something valuable, something that carried weight and consequence, and he admitted, almost hesitantly, that they had considered carefully who could be responsible, who could step into their lives with dedication, respect, and heart, and they had immediately thought of her, Ella, whose quiet strength, kindness, and attention to detail had not gone unnoticed, whose gentle nature had already proven a comfort, a presence that made their house feel alive even when they were away. And Grace nodded in agreement, her eyes soft yet serious, emphasizing the sincerity of the offer. And Ella felt a flood of emotions she could not name, pride, disbelief, fear, excitement, and a curious thrill that made her pulse race, her mind spinning with possibilities and uncertainties, and she realized that the offer was not just about the house, it was about trust, about being seen, about being valued in a way she had rarely experienced. And as Liam's words lingered in the air, she felt a strange stirring in her heart, a pull towards something she had secretly yearned for, a life that mattered beyond her routines, a sense of purpose that could anchor her, and perhaps even a chance to explore feelings she had tried to suppress, a connection to someone who had begun to occupy her thoughts in ways that were new and electrifying. And yet, with excitement came hesitation, the natural fear of the unknown, the weight of responsibility, the uncertainty of stepping into someone else's world and being trusted with their most precious possessions and intentions. And she looked at Liam, at the nervous way he fidgeted, the hope and vulnerability shining in his eyes, and she felt the undeniable pull of his presence, the magnetic energy that made it impossible to say no outright. And she thought about her own quiet life, the predictable days and lonely evenings, and the realization struck her with sudden clarity. This was her chance to step into something bigger, to embrace a life that could challenge her, change her, awaken parts of her she had kept dormant. And the rain outside seemed to mirror the cascade of thoughts and emotions racing through her mind, the rhythmic tapping against the windows echoing the heartbeat she could feel in her chest. And as Liam continued, explaining the practical details, the scope of responsibility, the ways they trusted her judgment, she found herself imagining the days ahead, mornings waking in the house, afternoons organizing, evenings perhaps reading by the fire, and in the quiet moments, the subtle, tantalizing thought of Liam nearby, of conversations that might stretch late into the night, of moments shared in silence that spoke louder than words. And she realized that the offer was more than a favor. It was a doorway to new experiences, new emotions, a life that could shimmer with possibility, with connection, with the quiet tension of attraction that had been growing between them since the first smile, since the first gesture of kindness. And she felt herself leaning into the moment, letting go of doubt just enough to entertain the idea of saying yes, letting the warmth of the room and the sincerity of Liam and Grace wash over her. And then, as if sensing her hesitation, Liam reached for the envelope, sliding it toward her gently, saying softly, almost like a whisper carried on the rain, "Read this. Think about it. We know it's sudden, but we couldn't imagine anyone else." Her fingers trembled slightly as she took it, unfolding the paper to reveal details she could barely process, a contract, a list of responsibilities, and yet beyond the practicalities, there was a note in the margin, a personal message, reminding her that this was more than duty, it was trust, it was belief in her. And Ella felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, a combination of awe and gratitude, realizing that someone had seen her worth, that she had value in ways she had never acknowledged for herself. And with that realization came a new pulse of courage, a willingness to consider this life-altering choice, to step into a world that promised challenge, excitement, and the undeniable spark of connection that had begun to stir between her and Liam. And she finally spoke, her voice steady despite the whirlwind in her chest, asking questions, clarifying details, expressing concerns, and Liam answered patiently, their conversation stretching into hours, blending practical matters with shared laughter, stories, and quiet moments where words were unnecessary. And through it all, Ella felt herself being drawn closer, not just to the house or the responsibility, but to Liam himself, to the warmth of his presence, to the gentle honesty in his eyes, to the promise of something unspoken, a potential for more than friendship, more than neighborly trust. And she realized that accepting this offer would change everything, not just her daily life, but the trajectory of her heart, her sense of purpose, her understanding of connection. And she felt the magnitude of it, a thrilling, terrifying, beautiful weight that left her breathless. And yet despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, she knew deep inside that this was an opportunity she could not ignore, a chance to step into life with open arms, to embrace trust, adventure, and perhaps even love. And as the rain softened outside and the first evening stars appeared in the twilight sky, she felt a quiet determination, a surge of hope mingled with longing, that whatever lay ahead, she was ready to meet it. And as she looked at Liam, standing nearby, vulnerable yet hopeful, she understood that the moments they shared in this living room were the beginning of a story that would weave their lives together, and that accepting the offer meant not just caring for a house, but opening her heart, stepping into a world where trust, emotion, and attraction intertwined. And in that understanding, she smiled softly, feeling the spark of possibility ignite within her, knowing that the coming days would test her, surprise her, and perhaps even transform her in ways she could not yet imagine. And with that thought, The soft glow of the fire reflecting in her eyes, Ella whispered to herself, almost as if sealing her resolve, that this was a chance to embrace life fully, to trust, to hope, to feel, and as Liam and Grace watched her, sensing the quiet decision forming, there was an unspoken acknowledgement that the story had truly begun, that the unexpected offer had already started to reshape her world, and that her heart, her life, and perhaps even her destiny, were about to change in ways both thrilling and deeply emotional, marking the first step into a journey of trust, longing, and possibility that would linger in her soul long after the rain had passed. The house felt different once Ella truly moved in, not empty but alive with quiet energy, as if every room remembered laughter and conversations and was waiting to breathe again. And from the first morning she woke there, sunlight stretching across unfamiliar walls, she sensed that this chapter of her life would not be calm or simple, because even as she focused on her tasks, organizing files, answering emails for the small business Liam and Grace ran, scheduling repairs, managing accounts, and learning details she had never handled before, her mind kept drifting back to Liam, to his voice, his steady presence, and the way he had looked at her the night she accepted the offer, with relief, gratitude, and something deeper that neither of them had dared to name. And as days moved quickly into weeks, Ella found herself growing stronger, more confident, her steps firmer as she made decisions, solved problems, and earned respect from people who had never known her before, and yet beneath the pride and purpose, there was a quiet ache that followed her through the halls, because every success reminded her of who had trusted her with this life, and every quiet evening reminded her that Liam was far away, preparing for a journey that would take him even farther from her reach. She tried to stay busy, waking early, filling her schedule, taking long walks in the evening to clear her head, but the house carried him in small ways she could not escape, in the books on the shelves, in the jacket still hanging by the door, in the faint scent of his cologne that lingered in the study, and sometimes she would stop without realizing it, her heart tightening as she wondered what he was doing, whether he thought of her, whether the connection she felt was one-sided or shared, and the uncertainty kept her restless, made her question her own emotions, because she had promised herself not to imagine things that might never be real, not to let hope turn into disappointment. Still, moments came when she could not control her feelings, like the afternoon she found an old notebook in the study drawer while searching for documents, its pages filled with Liam's thoughts, sketches, and half-written ideas, not meant for anyone else, and as she read a few lines about fear, responsibility, and wanting to build something meaningful, she felt closer to him than ever before, understanding that his calm strength was shaped by quiet doubts, by the same longing she carried, and she closed the notebook quickly, guilt washing over her, but also tenderness, because she realized he was not as distant or unshakable as she had imagined, and from that moment, her feelings deepened, becoming harder to ignore. Evenings grew heavier, the silence louder, and Ella often sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on, wondering when this strange arrangement would end and what would be left when it did, whether she would return to her old life or step into something entirely new. And it was during one of these evenings, when rain began to fall softly, that she received a message from Grace, checking in, thanking her, telling her how grateful they were, and mentioning that plans had shifted, that travel had been delayed, and Ella's heart jumped at the words. A sudden spark of excitement she tried to suppress, reminding herself not to read too much into simple updates. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the roof, and as she moved through the house, locking doors and turning off lights, she felt a strange tension in the air, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. And then, as she organized papers in the study, she noticed something she had missed before, a framed photo tucked behind a row of books, showing Liam standing by the sea, smiling freely, and written on the back were words about finding home in unexpected places, words that made her chest tighten because she wondered if she had become one of those places, if she had quietly become important to him without realizing it. And as she stood there, lost in thought, the sound of a knock echoed through the house, sharp and sudden, slicing through the silence, and her heart leapt into her throat, confusion and fear mixing as she moved toward the door, because no one ever visited unannounced, and the rain outside was relentless, the wind strong, and when she opened the door, there stood Liam, soaked, breathing hard, holding an umbrella that had clearly failed him, his hair damp, his eyes searching her face as if he were afraid she might disappear if he blinked, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of weeks of distance and unspoken feelings hanging between them, the sound of rain filling the space where words should have been, and Ella felt the world tilt slightly, because the person she had tried so hard not to miss was suddenly standing right in front of her, real and vulnerable. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm, saying he couldn't stay away, saying plans had changed, saying there were things he needed to say in person, things that didn't belong in messages or calls. And as she stepped aside to let him in, her hands trembling, she realized that everything she had been holding inside was about to surface, whether she was ready or not, and the house, once quiet and still, now felt charged with emotion, with anticipation, with the possibility of answers she both wanted and feared. And as the door closed behind him and the rain continued to fall, Ella knew that this moment, this unexpected return, would force her to confront the truth of her heart, the depth of her longing, and the choice she could no longer avoid, because whatever Liam had come to say, whatever path he hoped to take, would change not only their arrangement but the fragile balance she had built within herself. And as they stood facing each other, the air thick with unsaid words, Ella understood that the quiet weeks of waiting had led to this, that the house had not been holding memories but preparing for this very moment, and that nothing about her life would remain untouched after the conversation that was about to begin. The rain had finally stopped, leaving a soft mist over the streets of Willow Creek, and inside the house, Ella felt the tension of the previous weeks shift into something heavier, more urgent, a weight in her chest that she could no longer ignore, because Liam was there, standing in the living room, dripping wet, yet smiling with a vulnerability she had never seen before, and the air between them seemed charged, electric, as if every unspoken word, every glance, every small gesture from the past weeks had been leading to this exact moment. And she noticed the subtle tremor in his hands as he pushed wet hair from his eyes, and in that instant, Ella realized how much she had missed him, how deeply she had longed for his presence, how often she had imagined moments like this when the house was silent and her heart was heavy. And now that it had arrived, she felt both exhilaration and fear, because feelings she had tried to control, to suppress, were threatening to spill over, making her pulse race and her breath catch. And Liam, sensing her unease, took a tentative step closer, his eyes searching hers, full of questions and a quiet hope, and she understood immediately that this was not just a visit, not just a casual return, that he had crossed the threshold to speak truths that neither of them could delay any longer. And the room seemed smaller, warmer, the firelight casting dancing shadows across their faces as if nature itself conspired to highlight the intensity of the moment. And as Liam finally spoke, his voice low and steady, he confessed that the days apart had been harder than he expected, that thoughts of her had filled his hours, that every message, every call had been insufficient to bridge the distance he felt. And Ella, her hands still damp from bringing him inside, felt a swell of emotion, relief and fear and longing all mingling, realizing that she had been waiting for him to say these words. Yet part of her worried about what would come next, because desire and vulnerability carried consequences, and admitting feelings could not be undone, could not be taken back. And still, there was an undeniable pull between them, a magnetism that defied hesitation. And she stepped forward, closing some of the distance, feeling the warmth of his presence, noticing how familiar yet thrilling it was to stand near him, the faint scent of rain mixing with the lingering hints of cologne, the sound of the house creaking under their shared weight, the quiet hum of anticipation that made her stomach flutter. And for a moment, they simply looked at each other, words unnecessary, the depth of connection conveying everything they could not say aloud. And then Liam reached out, not touching, but indicating the tentative offer of closeness, and Ella, heart pounding, allowed herself to acknowledge how deeply she had come to care for him, how the house, the days of responsibility, the quiet moments of observation, had all led her to this, had prepared her for honesty, for vulnerability, for the undeniable truth that she could not imagine life without him in it. And they spoke slowly then, sharing thoughts and fears, dreams and regrets, discovering that their feelings mirrored each other, that the longing, the attraction, the subtle shifts of emotion over weeks had created a bond neither expected. And as they spoke, laughter mixed with serious admissions, memories of their first encounters resurfaced, and Ella realized that the small gestures, the kindnesses, the trust placed in her had built a bridge, a connection strong enough to withstand hesitation, doubt, and distance. And she felt tears prick her eyes, both for joy and for relief, because the unspoken had finally surfaced, because the house, once silent and unfamiliar, now seemed alive with possibility, echoing their emotions, reflecting the warmth and tension that had grown between them. And as the conversation continued, Liam admitted that the journey ahead was uncertain, that plans had changed, that their lives could take unexpected turns, yet he wanted her to know that she mattered, that she had become essential to him, that in his absence and his return, she had occupied space in his thoughts and heart that could not be ignored. And Ella, overwhelmed by emotion, found herself laughing softly, crying softly, feeling the weight of weeks lift as honesty, connection, and vulnerability filled the room, and the rain-soaked evening outside became irrelevant, insignificant compared to the storm of emotion in her heart. And in that intimacy, that raw truth, they began to understand that their lives had entwined in ways neither had anticipated, that trust had blossomed into affection, affection into longing, and longing into a quiet, simmering love that promised to grow, even in uncertainty. And as hours passed, the house became a sanctuary, a place where words could be exchanged freely, where silences were comfortable, where each glance, each small gesture, each touch of the hand carried weight and meaning. And Ella realized that this offer, once simply a task, a favor, had become the turning point of her life, a doorway not just to responsibility, but to connection, intimacy, and the awakening of emotions she had long denied herself. And as the night deepened, Liam finally stood close enough that the warmth radiating from him brushed her skin, and without words, they shared the quiet acknowledgement of feelings, a soft and gentle affirmation that the bond between them had shifted, that what had begun as neighborly trust and unexpected opportunity had blossomed into something far richer, something tender, romantic, and deeply human. And Ella felt her heart soar, understanding that life could surprise her, that taking risks, trusting others, opening herself to the unknown could lead to joy she had never imagined. And they spoke in whispers then, sharing plans for the coming days, small confessions, laughter, the mundane mixed with the profound, and in each exchange, the connection deepened, creating a space where honesty, warmth, and affection intertwined. And as the first rays of dawn crept through the curtains, painting the living room in soft gold, Ella stood by the window, Liam close behind her, feeling the pulse of possibility, the quiet certainty that life had irrevocably changed, that what had begun with a simple offer, a request to care for a house, had grown into trust, admiration, longing, and love. And she understood that she would never forget this night, the confession, the closeness, the delicate merging of two lives, two hearts, the gentle promise of shared future moments. And as the sun rose over Willow Creek, painting the streets in warm light, Ella felt a surge of courage and hope, knowing that whatever challenges came next, whatever choices needed to be made, she was ready to face them with Liam by her side, and that the unexpected offer had not only changed her life but had opened the door to a story of connection, romance, and heartfelt emotion that would shape her days and nights, her heart and soul, forever, leaving her standing there, smiling softly, feeling a thrill of anticipation and contentment, understanding that love, trust, and opportunity often arrive when least expected, and that embracing them could transform an ordinary life into an extraordinary journey filled with laughter, longing, and tender moments that linger long after the rain has passed. And in that quiet morning light, she turned to Liam, his hand finding hers naturally, their fingers intertwining, and she realized that the house, the offer, the days of solitude had all prepared her for this, prepared her to welcome love and connection fully, to embrace the unpredictable, to open her heart without fear. And as they stood together, breathing in the calm after the storm, the possibilities ahead seemed endless, the emotions within them undeniable, and the story that began with a simple favor had blossomed into a beautiful, unexpected chapter in both their lives, one that promised adventure, tenderness, and a deep, lasting bond that neither could have imagined until the day the rain knocked on the door and brought Liam home.